Thanks for tuning in. I'm Zing from SG Innovate. We are a government-owned organization that invests in and help build deep tech startups that leverage science and technology to make lives better for all. A big part of our work is to build a global community of leaders and doers who are driving deep tech innovations such as AI, medtech, quantum tech in our economy and society. In today's meetup, partnered with Center for Quantum Technologies and Google developers, we bring together those in our community from the budding, experienced, or just curious to delve into the realm of quantum computing and machine learning with these insightful presentations. So for today's agenda, we will first have Akarna Iyer, a graduate research student from NUS, as well as a Women Who Code Leadership Fellow, who will be introducing us to quantum computing through TensorFlow, Quantum, and Cirq. This will be followed by Kishore Bharti, a theoretical physicist from Center for Quantum Technology, who will be exploring horizons of quantum machine learning with us. So for some housekeeping rules before we start, our presenters will be answering the Q&A questions at the end of both presentations. So please do leave your questions in the Q&A box below. So without further ado, let me have Akarna up here and to have the screen. Akarna, please.
Hi, hello everyone. It's so nice that you could join us in the morning. Just 1 second, I'm just going to share my screen. So I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. And today I'll be talking about introduction to quantum computing and TensorFlow Quantum. So a little bit about me. So basically, I'm a graduate student at NUS. I'm doing my master's by research in electrical and computer engineering. I'm also the leadership fellow at Women Who Code. So Women Who Code is this non-profit organization, a global organization which works towards getting more women in the field of technology. And I'm leading the tracks for Python, where I basically help to curate events and get more women involved through workshops, talks, etc. I'm also doing my research in deep learning and smart grids. And previously, I was a research engineer at Sama Technologies for around 2 years, where I worked as a deep learning researcher in the fields of deep learning and NLP. So Sama Technologies was basically a pharma IT company, so I got to work with a lot of NLP-based problems. And in the past couple of months, I also had a chance to work with Udacity on their Intel AI Edge AI for IoT developers nano degree, where I basically designed the course for choosing the right hardware for the edge. So enough about me, and I'll jump right into the topic and what I'll be talking about today. So I'll be talking about what exactly the classical computers can't do. I'll be talking about what are QCs and how exactly they're disrupting our ways into our views on computation. What exactly is quantum supremacy and what it holds? The types of quantum computers, who are the big players in the market that we can see? Then getting down into quantum computers as such and getting down into what qubits are and their properties. And why exactly do we say that quantum computers have different rules to play by? And then going and introducing you into quantum machine learning through TF quantum, and also explaining a little bit about TF quantum plus Cirq, and showing a demo in the end, hopefully. So today, most of my talk will be introductory, and I will try as much as to encapsulate the fact of bringing, simple ideas into what exactly is quantum computers. Because one thing you need to realize when coming into this frame is that a lot of us have been dealing with classical computers probably all our lives. And to understand what quantum computers bring into this play will be completely different. It will have a paradigm shift. So don't worry if during this presentation you might not understand a lot of things. That is completely fine. I have tried to put in examples which are quite real world and which might make sense and which might not be too much into the quantum physics. And I hope from this presentation maybe you can go back and maybe want to look into what it is. And I hope you enjoy it. So I'll jump right into it. So coming right into what exactly do we mean by what are the things that classical computers cannot do. So classical computers have optimization problems. And these are things that classical computers cannot do. You have chemical compound representation simulations that a classical computer cannot do, exponential scaling, security encryptions. So security encryptions, for example, even your most powerful supercomputers cannot probably encrypt a lot of your break a lot of your security encryption. So all of that is something that a classical computer or a supercomputer cannot do. And what I mean by here that they cannot do is they cannot do it in a very efficient manner. And most of my talk here is actually inspired by this woman called Talia Grayson. So she's this awesome researcher at IBM-Q. And she had this wonderful talk about IBM quantum computers way back in 2017. And I used some of her concepts to explain what exactly I'm going to be presenting today. So optimization problems, what exactly do I mean by optimization problems? So optimization is basically finding the best solution to a problem given many other possible solutions. So let us take a very simple example here of, a table, a round table with like, I say 8 people around this table. So what are the number of possibilities here becomes? I mean, if you know a little bit of permutation and combination, it becomes 8 factorial. But I mean, this is easy to compute. I mean, it is around 40,320. But what happens if I add one more person to the table, or if I add two more? It becomes around 3.6 million, I guess. So you understand that, it sort of increases exponentially. Similarly, there's another area where classical computers don't do well, that is chemical compound simulations. So anyone who eats food, it creates ammonia. So this is this nitrogenous enzyme which is created by our bodies. And ammonia has been, as we know, is sort of used by fertilizers and also as a catalyst in our body. And so basically, this is the chemical compound, and it has 3 iron sulfates in it of different sizes. And surprisingly, we can only simulate this size, the size here, um, the size here on our biggest supercomputer. So imagine the things that we aren't able to simulate, and imagine the regions that we aren't able to go just because we are limited to the classical computer as such. And now comes exponential scaling. So exponential scaling is another problem. So there's this very famous story about, a king and an inventor. So there's this very poor inventor who goes up to a king and sort of, asked him that, give me the grain of rice is equivalent to the first square in the, chessboard, and sort of increase it every day. So, I mean, the second day you have to give me, 2 grain of rice. And so what happens is the first day it will be 2 to the power 1, then it will be 2 to the power 0, then 2 to the power 1, then 2 to the power 2. So you can imagine that it sort of scales exponentially. So I mean, the king ended up, just saying that, yeah, sure, I can give it, and thought maybe it's just going to be 64, right? Because there's 64 squares in this chessboard. But what happens is the first when the person reaches 2 to the power 10, it's already a huge amount of rice. And eventually when you reach 2 to the power 64, it is said that you have, as rice is huge as the Mount Everest. So you can imagine the problem of exponential scaling. Like it gradually increases, but then there is like a peak. So that is what is one of the areas where classical computers don't work quite well. And so all of these problems, like even the optimization problems, you will see one of the things that they have in common is exponential scaling. And this is a major hurdle with classical computers and supercomputers too. So this is where we introduce sort of quantum computers, and why we sort of believe that they are sort of disrupting the current views on computation. So this quantum computers goes back to quantum physics, where you define the logic, like the way that atom was studied in the earlier 20th century. It turns out that atoms don't follow the traditional rules of physics. Quantum particles can move both forward and backward and can exist in 2 places at once. So it is because of this strange behavior that we are able to utilize quantum computers and take advantage of it. So now coming into quantum supremacy. So I'm not very sure, but you would have heard this term, especially last year towards the end, like October and so. And so what exactly is quantum supremacy, and why is there a hype behind this and quantum computing? So this dates back to something called the Church-Turing thesis. So what the Church-Turing thesis stated is that if a problem can be solved by a Turing machine, then it can also be solved by a computational device. But the extension of the thesis also states the fact that it states that a Turing machine can always efficiently simulate any computational model, even to simulate inherently a quantum computation model, which we know isn't true, because as I said, from a lot of examples, there are a lot of places where classical computers do not end up doing well. So obviously this sort of breaks or uh, you know uh, uh, says that the Church-Turing thesis is wrong. So there is where quantum supremacy comes in, and these are the articles I bet you would have heard about in the last, I guess, October of last year, where Google sort of achieved quantum supremacy. So I'll touch a little bit into that and what exactly it is. So quantum supremacy is basically the fact that we are able to say that a quantum computer is able to solve a computation that a classical computer cannot so efficiently. That is all quantum supremacy is. It's just given a very broad term, but at the end of the day, it's as simple as the fact that you're able to do something on a quantum computer very efficiently, very quickly, that a classical computer cannot. So what does this quantum computer basically help us, or what does it hold? So it promises to sort of go beyond the most powerful supercomputers we have, and sort of henceforth, defies the Church-Turing thesis. And also, what exactly did Google do? Why do we say that they achieved quantum supremacy? And later I'll also explain a little bit about that. So I'll jump right into what exactly Google did. So I won't go right into a lot into their paper, but I'll give you a very high level view of what they did. So back in 2017, Google did say that they will try and produce a viable quantum computer in the next 5 years, which would achieve quantum supremacy with a 50 qubit quantum computer. But the top supercomputers we know can do everything that a 5 to 20 quantum computers can. And so and what they did 2 years later was to actually produce a 72 qubit machine, which also has something called noise, which I'll explain a little bit later. But Google's quantum computer basically tackled this task of random sampling problem, in which they did a series of calculation for each of the qubit outputs, either 1 or 0. And the aim was to calculate the probability for each possible outcome occurring. And the math behind it might be hard, but what is interesting to note here is that they were able to find the answer in just 3 minutes, something that would have taken 10,000 years for the most powerful supercomputer out there. So that is why it was groundbreaking. There's a lot of question into whether or not this will actually help us later on, like what they did, but it is still groundbreaking that we were able to achieve that. So who are the big players in QC? So like quantum computers, who are like the big players right now? So you have universal quantum computers like IBM. You also have quantum annealers like D-Wave, and you have superconducting bits, basically, which are electrical quantum circuits, like how Google uses it. So they are basically the big players that are involved in this space. So IBM quantum computer is a universal gate quantum computer. So universal gate quantum computing is much broader, and it sort of relies on qubits where basic quantum circuit operations are applied, which are similar to classical operations that we know. And they recently released a 53 qubit machine. One of the unfortunate problems that most of the researchers have with IBM is that there are not many papers out there of how IBM is sort of doing this. And that sort of shifts with Google Quantum, because they have a lot of papers, and later on I'll show you that they have a simulator too. So to access the simulator and to use the quantum computer actually helps us. And that's something that and the fact that Google did release their quantum supremacy paper too sort of helps us understand how exactly they achieved it. So what does a Google quantum computing consist of? It consists of superconducting bits, and it uses electrical circuits to generate this thing called qubits. So they have this bristlecone quantum computers, as I explained, the 72-bit quantum computer by Google. And yeah. So another type of quantum computers are quantum annealers, which are a type of quantum adiabatic QCs, and they actually help in solving optimization problems which are quite close to quantum machine learning, where they treat any problem as an energy minimization problem. So what they believe is that at any point they have, instead of qubit, they have qubos. What the qubos will do is they'll try to achieve the minimum energy state, and therefore could be used for solving any probability sampling problem. For example, if especially you're a CS student, you would have heard of the traveling salesman problem. So that is very centric to quantum annealers and adiabatic quantum computers as such. So getting into what exactly are qubits. So qubits are something that is fundamental to a quantum computer. It's like the fundamental building block. And what we need to understand here is there's a paradigm shift. So when you have a classical computer, it can either be 0 or 1. But when you have a qubit, it can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. So what I mean by this is comes from, for example, if you're tossing a coin, right? When like on the ground, the coin can either be a head or a tail. But when it is tossing on the air, it can be both head and tail at the same time. So imagine the qubit to be something similar. So what are the properties here that we look at? So firstly, we have the property of superposition. So at any given time, the qubit can be both in a superposition of 0 and 1, as I explained in the coin case, where at the top it can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. And if you think about it mathematically, it means that 2 qubits can be in 4 states and 3 in 8, because it is 2 to the power 3 and so on. Hence you're sort of expanding it, and as I mentioned, exponential scaling comes into place. And then you have the property of entanglement. The property of entanglement is basically that that a particle cannot, any qubit or quantum state cannot be independent of the state of the others. So in order to judge what state the quantum bit is in, you have to sort of judge it according to the adjacent qubit. And so what you do is you sort of apply a phase to the qubits, and you end up amplifying some of the answers, and then you end up canceling some of the others. So why do QCs have different rules to play by? So we understand that quantum computers have this amazing thing called qubits, and sort of increases our possibilities to actually end up solving problems such as exponential scaling. But they also have some of the limitations of QCs, hereby which you cannot actually end up using QCs right now so efficiently. So what are the problems that are there? You have quantum error correction, and you also have qubit decoherence. So quantum decoherence is basically quantum noise which is generated. So noise can sort of arise from a lot of factors. They can arise from electronic heats or impurities or the qubit material itself. And sort of to, I mean, that's a very, I guess, technical in nature. To sort of understand what do I mean by noise is the fact that, it can be compared to a murmuring in a crowd, and you don't know where the noise is coming from. Like, you don't know whether, who is murmuring in this crowd. So it's something similar. And it's sort of I think one of the very active areas of research where you treat this noise as treat this noise in a Gaussian nature and sort of research about it. And another problem is quantum error correction. So, more money, more problems, like that. You have more qubits, you have more problems because you have more error. So this is one of the very famous, graphs. And what it states is, on the x-axis is the number of qubits, and the y-axis is the error rate. As you can see here, the number of qubits, as it increases, you have like you also have a high number of error too. So what it states is that we have Sycamore, which is Google's quantum computer, which is right in the middle, which has a good amount of qubits but still has high error. And when exactly our quantum computers will become useful and treat and solve problems such as Shor's algorithm is when we have a lot of qubits and very little noise. So we still haven't reached this area yet, and we are somewhere here. And TensorFlow quantum is also somewhere here, where you have a lot of qubits, which is 10 to the power 3, I mean a mid-size range of qubits, and they have less noise. So I'll also get into how TensorFlow quantum ends up doing it. So what it means is, what I mean by noise is that, you end up losing a lot of information out to the environment. Imagine you're going for a picnic and you have these, Coke cans with you, but the Coke cans are actually opened, and you end up, taking it to the picnic with you. So you end up spilling a bit of the Coke, right? And that means you're spilling the drink that you actually wanted to take while you were having it at your picnic. So that means you're sort of spilling that information out to the environment. So something similarly, even though we might have a lot of quantum qubits, if the error is a lot, we end up spilling it to the environment, and they actually are pretty useless then. So we need to sort of find the trade-off and find the balance between the two. So yeah. So yeah, getting right into quantum machine learning, because I know I'm also running out of time. So why exactly do we need it? So we need quantum machine to analyze and distill quantum data as such. And quantum neural networks sort of mimics neural networks where inputs are sort of mapped to the output. So there are different parts of a quantum machine learning. The first part is you sort of generate the quantum data on the fly, and then you use the parameterized circuits to actually simulate it. And here the parameterized circuits is circ. So the target towards this is we actually run hybrid based model. So if you see on your right side of your screen, this is a hybrid based model where you have something called NISQ computers, and they are a combination of both CPUs and QPUs. So CPUs are your normal processors and QPUs are quantum processing units. So what you do is you run some part of your model on the CPU, and then you run some other part of your model on the QPU. So the NISQ has few qubits. So as we have seen, the fewer qubits we have, the lower is the error rate. And so this also holds some amounts of problem. So first is, how do you generate data on the fly? I mean, how do you generate quantum data right out on the fly? So another problem is the fact that there's a difference in time. So the time taken by the CPU might be different from the time taken by the QPUs. This also causes an imbalance. But even then, it is something which is, still viable, and that can be used. And that is what I'll showcase later. And this sort of brings us to TensorFlow Quantums. So sort of building these hybrid models, which I explained using TensorFlow and Cirq. And what is important to remember here about Cirq is that everything gets mapped to a tensor. So your quantum circuit gets mapped to a tensor, your poly operators get mapped to a tensor, and then you sort of feed forward these nodes onto a computational graph, which is your TensorFlow graph, and which we sort of use and we know about. And then, as you know, TensorFlow uses C++. So at the end of the day, you're using C++ to efficiently simulate these circuits. And so Cirq is this toolbox created by the TensorFlow quantum team. So out here, it just means that, this diagram is just about how it gets mapped to a tensor. And it runs the parameterized circuit in an iterative manner. Why it does it in an iterative manner is to sort of make sure that we are, because even though we have less qubits, we do have error. So we have to make sure that we run it over and over again in order to get the best results. So yeah, I'll jump right into the demo. Yeah, so I'll just showcase how to actually build a very easy Cirq circuit, and just to map it to TensorFlow circuit. And so yeah, so basically for setting up the notebook, you have to do, so it runs on TensorFlow 2.1, and you have to also install TensorFlow Quantum. And then basically you have to import Cirq. You have to import SymPy too, because you're using symbolic Python here. And then what you do is, the first step you do is you sort of build the circuit. So so for building the circuit, you have to create the qubits. So we just take 2 qubits here, Q0 and Q1, and we take a Cirq is basically circuit. So like a parameterized circuit. So we just take a grid qubit of the shape, of 1 row and 2 columns. And what we then do is basically we do in these 2 lines, we basically create a circuit here by using Cirq. So we defined our qubits, now we're making the circuit. So in order to make the circuit, we do rotation along the x-axis, rotation along the y-axis, and then we apply the CNOT gate. And then after it, we actually move on to using something called the param resolver. So Cirq param resolver, what exactly it does is to to sort of evaluate the circuits, we need the circ simulator interface. And you need to sort of replace the free parameters in the circuit with specific numbers using the circ param resolver. So the resolver here, you give this number where A is 0.5, B is minus 0.5, and then you sort of pass it through the circ simulator, and this is what you get your output state vectors to be. So all of these you'll notice are complex numbers, because as I said, the qubit gets when you can't stop the qubit in between when it's sort of defining its quantum state. So at the end of the day, you can only stop it in the end, and that will either be 0 or 1. So you want to make sure that you sort of get the values midway too, and this is what you get. These are all complex numbers, but at the end of the day, we still need to map these complex numbers and apply measurements to it. And to apply these measurements, we use something called, here we use the Z0 measurement, and then we map it to Q0 and Q1, and then we sort of get the expectation from, we use this expectation from wave function function. And what we do is, and we map it to a real value. So previously, if you would have gotten a complex value in nature, the dot real makes it real and you actually get a real value. And similarly, you can do much more complicated measurements too, where you're doing half Z0 plus X1. So all these like the measurements can be taken in the combinations of all these Pauli's operator, which are X, Y, and Z. And yeah, and then you basically pass it through the TF quantum, where you basically convert the circuit into TF circuit. And then you use yes. And then what you do is you use the circ simulator. So as I said, you have to move iteratively through this parameterized circuit in order to get your values of measurement. And this is how the loop looks like. You're doing the same thing that you did before. All you're doing it is in a loop in order to get your values. But what you realize is that TF quantum does it in a much efficient manner, where it, you just have a small layer called expectation layer, and it essentially gives you the same output in one line. So there is a lot many things you can do, and I've shared my notebook here, and it also has hybrid quantum classical optimization, where you can look into much more complex problems. But I'll go ahead and stop this for now, because I think I've taken enough of Kishore's time too. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, for sort of listening. And I hope, like, I know there was a lot of information given in a very little amount of time, but I hope you can just, find the time to go back to it, and maybe, just search about it or learn about it, and maybe that helps you sort of get into the field later on. So feel free to reach out to me, and if you would want any collaborations, I would love to do that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Akarna. So now let's have Kishore up. Kishore, please.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks, Archana. It was a very nice talk, and yeah, I mean, like, I happen to learn also something there. So yeah, thanks a lot. So I will start my slides very soon. So let me just. Yeah. So is this visual, like my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Kishore.
Okay, awesome. So I mean, so I will be talking about exploring horizons of quantum machine learning here, and like, my work has been made kind of easy by the talk of Archana, and so I would also kind of introduce myself a bit. So for that, I have this slide here, and you can see, like, two pictures there, where some of the people whom I love most in the world, they are there, like my group members, and my and you can see, like, some of the people on the slide, they have gone on to become like CEOs of companies, and like some guy joined industry, and like Tencent and other places, and we hang out, and we do some research also. So you can see some research, my research papers there on the right hand side, and these research papers are from from the area of quantum machine learning, and we do other kind of research also, like related to quantum technology and all. So basically, I mean, we are situated at Center for Quantum Technology, which is one of the best places in the world to do study quantum theory and like, you know, do research, and they're like amazing set of people around with whom you can talk and all. So if you are in Singapore or around and you want to talk to us, come to CQT, and we would like to chat and all. It's an amazing place. Okay, so I will directly come to the topics like which I will present here. So the first thing I will talk about is like, what do you mean by quantum machine learning? Like, I mean, what is the meaning of the word? Then what are the key contributions in this area of QML? What is the future of QML? And then suppose you want to work in QML, like as a researcher, then what are the possible resources that you should look so that you can start working in QML? Okay. So before we start talking about like, you know, quantum machine learning, you have to like understand what does learning mean. So learning is a kind of a task where you learning is something which converts experience to expertise. Like you, like for example, when we talk about the spam filter thing, the program basically is being told that it's spam or it's not a spam, and then like through experience, it learns to categorize the emails into a spam or not a spam, like ham or something. So like at the end of the day, it like gathers some expertise, and then this transition from experience to expertise is what learning is. Now this learning thing not only happens in like, you know, machines or like, you know, humans or whatever, it happens in animals also. Like for example, like you can see the picture of the rat there. And it's very difficult to poison rats because like whenever you try to poison them, like they just take one bite of the food, and from there like they can figure out if it's if it's a poisonous food or like not poisonous food. Like, I mean, like just a minute. Yeah. So basically, I mean, and then in pigeons also, and many different animals, like animal kingdom, you can see this the phenomena of learning happens. One very simple example you can find, you know, this papaya example that I have put there, is that suppose you go to some island and you do not know like whether the papaya is there, that, you know, so the papaya, they are like a significant ingredient of the local diet there, and you have never tasted papaya before, and you want to know whether the papaya there is tasty or non-tasty. Now you have to learn to predict whether the papaya that you see in the market is tasty or non-tasty. That you can predict by by touch, so it can be very like hard, or it can be very mushy, or by color, so it can be very green to very orange. And then there is some particular, you know, like a range where it can be tasty, like, you know, like not very green but not very orange, or not very like hard and not very mushy. And then in that interval, basically it's a tasty papaya. So if we really talk about the machine learning thing, it's precisely like there was a definition by Tom Michel in 1997, and he said that a computer program is said to learn from experience E with respect to some class of task T and performance P if its performance at task in T as measured by P improves with experience E. Basically, it means that there is some task T, and as you get more expertise, your performance on that task T increases. So this is about like kind of machine learning means. Okay, so think about it. Like, I mean, suppose you are in some grad school or you are somewhere, and you are kind of over time, if your performance on and at some task T does not increase, then basically you are not learning. So in that sense, this direct proportionality between performance and experience is what, like, you know, learning basically means. So when it comes to quantum, what does like quantum machine learning mean? Like, I mean, and one can come up with many different definitions. So for some people, basically quantum machine learning is about quantum effects to perform machine learning better. On the other hand, for some people, it's a field exploring the connections between quantum theory and machine learning. So basically, I mean, the first definition, if you look at it, it's like, it's kind of a, how should I say, like practical definition, like you want to achieve some practical task. And like, as Archana said, like sometimes it can be very difficult for the classical computers to perform like machine learning. So you want to use quantum effects like superposition or entanglement or whatever to perform the machine learning better. Sometimes it could be about, like exploring the connections between quantum theory and machine learning. So that is more like, from the fundamental point of view, like you want to see like how do these two theories, when they come together, like how do they kind of merge and like help each other. But then there are like another kind of learning also, like quantum inspired machine learning, where you kind of look at quantum, like you look at quantum theory, and then you see certain kind of phenomena or like certain techniques which are being used in the quantum theory, and you want to use them in the machine learning community to improve that. So is that like quantum machine learning? So from a researcher's point of view, it's not quite clear like what is quantum machine learning. And over time, like we are kind of settling down, still like thinking about like what is quantum machine learning. But you can like pick up one particular definition, like you can think that, oh, maybe it's about just, depending on whether you are a practical guy or you want to think from foundational point of view. But there is a like, one like something which I kind of like, and is seen at most of the places in the quantum machine learning literature, is this definition where you want to kind of categorize the different machine learning algorithms or machine learning like tasks that happen into 4 different categories. So whenever machine learning happen, you have basically some data and you have some algorithm. If your data is classical and if the algorithm is classical, then basically it's a totally classical machine learning, what like classical people do. But suppose your data is classical and the algorithm is quantum, or the data is quantum and the algorithm is classical, or the data is quantum and the algorithm is also quantum, then you are in this basically CQ, QC, and QQ regime. Now, basically anything except CC, the fully classical part, one can call that as quantum machine learning. Now, people can still argue that maybe QQ is the genuine quantum machine learning, but it's up to your taste. Like, I mean, what you want to call quantum machine learning. So I will leave you kind of confused with respect to what is quantum machine learning. I will like you to take your own position. And to me, it's basically anything where anything except CC. So like if you are anyhow bringing quantum theory in contact with machine learning, then it's basically quantum machine learning. Okay. So now I would like to like talk about the key contributions in QML. This area of quantum machine learning is quite rich. Like there are so many work like done, and every day on arXiv and like on in journals we see many nice papers coming, and there is a like how should I say, like very vibrant, active community of researchers working in this area, and people in CQT and all around the globe, they are working. So I am not putting everything which is there in quantum machine learning, but just want to like contributions from there, which kind of for like, as I think, shaped this field of quantum machine learning. So for that, I will talk about, like the first contribution, which I like most, is something called HHL algorithm, which is based on solving linear system. So like, like in machine learning, if we talk about it, it's basically, I mean, most of the machine learning that we do is nothing but data fitting. I mean, curve fitting basically. And there is something other than that, which involves causality, but if we do not include that part, then most of the machine learning that we are doing at the moment is not really very powerful machine learning. I mean, through curve fitting, we can do certain things, but it's not, like the enough to make intelligent species. But nonetheless, let's say we have seen many nice things coming out of because of the research in this curve fitting paradigm. And one of the very basic thing that you would like to do is something called linear fit. And this linear fit has been used in like regular, like, when you do something like least square fit or in support vector machine or those places. And there you have to solve something like a linear system. So a linear system problem is basically you have system of linear equation and you want to solve them. So you have basically Ax equal to B, and you want to find some X such that, it satisfies Ax equal to B. So you have been given A and B and you have to find X. So a simple example I show that x1 plus x2 equal to 2, x1 plus 2x2 equal to 3. Then basically you have A equal to 1, 1, 1, 2, the matrix A. B is 2, 3. Now at this point, what is the value of x1 and x2? You can basically solve this thing using Gaussian elimination or, like those algorithms. And and there are other algorithms also like conjugate gradient descent and so on. But the problem is that as the size of the matrix like increases, these algorithms go like something like, you can say, if you do not talk about very the powerful algorithm like something average like Gaussian elimination or something, they go like NQ. So if size of the matrix is something like a billion or something, then the n cube of a billion, that's a very big number. So I mean, at some point it will be very difficult even to do the curve fitting and all. And as we are seeing that we are in this age of big data where, I mean, every day so much data is being generated and you want to do machine learning, at some point it will become very difficult. So we have to come up with, like new kind of powerful computers which can do this task. And we need algorithms for that. And one of the heroes of my field, like Adam Harrow, with Seth Lloyd and Avintan Hasidim, came up with this algorithm called quantum linear system problem algorithm, like HHL algorithm. And he said that you have AX equal to B, convert that into a quantum linear system problem. Like you call it A bra X equal to bra B. Sorry, capital X equal to ket X equal to ket B. So this ket X and ket B, they are basically, like they are the notations for, how should I say, like quantum states. So like what you do that you convert your X into a quantum state, you convert your B into some quantum state, and you try to basically solve this problem of X equal to B on a quantum computer. So you have somehow, you have access to B and you have access to A, and in logarithmic amount of time, basically logarithmic in n, you can solve this problem. And people applied this problem to many different, this algorithm to many different problems like quantum data fitting problem, support vector machine, and they got advantage. Okay. Then there are another breed of algorithms which like came recently, like in 4 or 5 years, is something called this variational algorithms, which are kind of shaping the industry at the moment. So I mean, the algorithms which I talked earlier, this HHL algorithm, it's more like, how should I say, like a far term algorithm. Like when we have very powerful computers, then only we can like perform these algorithms. But at the moment we have some quantum computer, like it's not very powerful quantum computer, it's a small kind of quantum computer. So can we take help of the small quantum computer that we have and the classical computer that the big classical computers that we have, and use them in conjunction such that you gain some advantage? And towards this like two nice algorithms has been proposed, like this variational quantum algorithm and this QAOA, like quantum approximate optimization algorithm. And a lot of research is being done to understand like how can you get the advantage, like what is the best you can do with these algorithms. And I mean, every day I'm being humbled by the new research and like the new results which are coming in this field. And almost nothing has been understood in this area. Like at some point I also contributed to this field, and one has to kind of understand like how can you do training, how can you like kind of initialize the parameters, how can you solve some important problem like worthwhile problem using this kind of algorithms. So I mean, as Archana mentioned, like Google last year showed this thing called quantum supremacy, which is kind of debatable. Like, I mean, we have supremacy, but one has to like take this thing with a pinch of salt. Like, I mean, it's kind of like we are there, but it's not like, not how should I say, like we have quantum supremacy, but it's not like, there is still like controversy and debate going on, and it's settling like, was 53 qubit enough to show like quantum supremacy, or do we need 55 qubit, or maybe at some day we will like these debates will be over when we will reach something like 60 qubit and all. But let's say assume that we have some kind of quantum supremacy, we have something which is very like, how should I say, powerful, which was done by quantum computer. Like they did something in 300 seconds which could have taken a classical computer something like 10,000 years. Now the point is, what they did was not very useful, but can you do something useful with these quantum computers that we have at the moment? And so that is called finding the killer app application, like something which will change the landscape that we have at the moment. Like basically that will be a big how should I say, $1 billion industry if we find a killer application for quantum machine learning. And these algorithms like variational quantum eigensolver or QAOA, these are kind of, the potential candidates which can be used to basically harness the power that we have. But one has to be very careful, like when you are proposing an algorithm and saying that, see, I got exponential speed up over the classical algorithm and all, because there, when you are comparing the quantum with classical, you have to compare with the best known classical, and then people can work in the classical algorithm also, and they can improve it. So the gap between quantum and classical, that can kind of shorten if people can improve the classical part. So like the guarantees that one has to often make from the quantum case, that has to be very robust. You have to either bring some complexity theoretic arguments or something, so that you believe that I have got the best advantage with respect to, how should I say, like in the worst case scenario or something. Or even, let's say, in the practical case also, if you can make some statement, you have to be very careful. Like, is it with respect to the best known algorithm or something? So there is this paradigm, something called dequantization, where inspired by what has been done in the quantum theory, people try to do something from the classical theory and try to improve the classical algorithm. So, back in past, two, nice gentlemen at CQT, like, from Center for Quantum Technology only, Kerendis and Anupam Prakash, they came up with a machine learning algorithm called for recommendation systems, and they showed the exponential advantage. But then last year, this young lady who was a teenager at that time, she came up with an algorithm which kind of reduced the exponential separation to the polynomial separation. So polynomial is like better than exponential. It's not like another separation kind of reduced, but still there are constants and all which one has to take into account. So and this was a big news, because as you can see, there was this Quantum magazine thing which I have put there. It says major quantum computing advance made obsolete by a teenager. So one has to really understand, like, the guarantees that we are saying that the quantum computer are very powerful. Is it possible to get inspired by the quantum algorithm and make a classical algorithm which is very, very powerful? And the gap between quantum and classical kind of reduces. So it's like a kind of race where quantum advances and the classical advances. And then either you can prove something based on complexity theoretic arguments that the quantum is best always, like the way we prove in the case of communication. But in computation side, one has to be very careful and prove it rigorously when giving some kind of guarantees that, So that will be like kind of my pessimistic message, but one has to be very careful in doing research about taking these things. And we know that the quantum computers are powerful and they are like kind of superset of what classical computers can do, but how much they can do, what are the areas where they can perform, how much better they can perform, there one has to like prove these things very rigorously. Okay, so this brings us to the like kind of a second last part, where the future of QML, like where do I see kind of this field of quantum machine learning to go. So there are some fundamental problems like input problem, output problem, costing problem, and benchmarking problem. So like in your quantum computer, you have to load the data. Like, we know that there are algorithms which can give you polynomial advantage over the classical algorithms and so on. But the point is that you have to load the data to the quantum computer. And to the load data, you cannot simply assume that you can, it will be very easy. Like it can be very difficult task often to prepare arbitrary states, quantum states. So one has to think about how to load data properly. And there is something called quantum RAM, which one has to, like the experimentalist and other people have to build and think about, like, or we have to think about like what are the relevant states in the, the space of quantum states called Hilbert space, which where one can prepare and use them to do like, important tasks and all. So this input problem is very important, like how to load the data. Then similarly, the output problem, what happens with quantum theory is that, yeah, you can remain in superpositions of many different possibilities, but the moment you measure, you collapse. And you collapse to basically one of the quantum states. Now, the point is that when you collapse, it's again back to classical. So you have to basically perform many measurements to really estimate what was the quantum state on which you performed the measurement when it collapsed, like which led to its collapse. So yeah, so sometimes, like instead of finding the state, one could look in something like summary statistics like mean or whatever, or like expectation value of some operator. So that can kind of alleviate this problem. The third thing is the costing problem, like how many gates are there in the circuit, like that one has to analyze using query complexity or computational complexity arguments. And the last one is the benchmarking problem. Like when you are saying that my computer is my algorithm is very good compared to what? Like, I mean, is it like worst case guarantee, or is it like a guarantee you are just giving based on your intuition? So one has to be very careful, like based on like benchmarking and all. There are many challenges at the moment. Like I have put a figure from my paper on the side about this training challenge. So sometimes when you train, what happens that you so for example, like, I mean, artificial intelligence in 80s suffered through 90s, kind of went through this winter period where people didn't know how to train better, or like they didn't have like good computers at that time. They did not have GPUs and all those technology that we have at the moment. So like advancement had to be made at the frontier of like algorithm side, and at the frontier of how should I say hardware side. So at the hardware side we are kind of improving, but similar to the back propagation algorithm that we have in the case of how should I the classical community, we have to find similar algorithm in the quantum community. And when you try to do simple gradient descent and all, there are barren plateaus. Like, I mean, the optimization become very difficult. So one has to kind of bring ideas from Riemannian geometry, like and all, like and really understand the landscape. Like maybe the landscape which we try to explore based on our ideas from like regular Euclidean geometry, that's not good. I mean, maybe you have to understand the Riemannian geometry better. And then already in physics, in general theory of relativity, we explore such topics in detail. So already there are concepts like quantum natural gradient and all, which came on quantum recently. They try to tackle this problem. Also, one has to tackle like better networks, like as we see in quantum community, there is no one particular agreement about what is the best quantum neural network. And there, as you can see, there are many different examples of network that people have come up with, and depending on which network you use, you have some benefits and then some challenges, and then one has to properly understand like which network is the best network. I mean, one has to kind of investigate some amount of time in this, like using techniques from mathematics and all, like try to understand it. So as we see in the classical community, for example, like when they use CNNs instead of feed-forward network, they got some advantage. I mean, one can say whether the same kind of thing happen in the quantum community, like how to like, are the parametric quantum circuit the best circuit? Is the hardware unsought, which is a kind of a parametric quantum circuit, the best? I mean, under some kind of initialization and all, like, I mean, one has to ask this question. The last thing from with respect to future that I am kind of curious is about modeling causality. So, I mean, when we do science, we do not talk about, we do not simply talk about like association between variables. Like we want to sometimes like to do counterfactual reasoning also, like the way, like for example, Einstein, he came up with a special theory of relativity. For that, he tried to imagine what if he starts moving at the speed of light. I mean, he did not move at the speed of light. He thought what would happen if he would have moved at the speed of light. So sometimes, this kind of counterfactual reasoning is very much important. And you have to understand the cause and effect. So basically this guy, Judea Pearl, whose picture is there, he is kind of leading this field of causality. And he said that to build truly intelligent machines, you have to teach them cause and effect. I mean, at the moment, what we are doing in the machine learning community, this is a criticism of classical machine learning also. That's basically curve fitting, like at the level of association. It's like, in the picture, you can see there is a ladder and then there is a owl, and near the owl, you have this robot. So it's just seeing different variables and trying to fit the curve. But a child or a early man, that's at the next rung. It's at the level of doing. You try to intervene and see, like, what will happen. And then at the last rung is the imagination part, where you try to imagine and try to think about counterfactuals. So to truly build intelligent machines, you have to basically go at the last rung. But the problem is that, these things are being done using the technique of something called Bayesian network or probabilistic graphical models. And often you have to compute partition functions there, some weird quantity, which takes a lot of calculations on a classical computer. And many people believe that, including me, that in long term, maybe quantum computers can help us there. I mean, to really understand that. Okay, so that brings to the last part, where I would like to simply mention, some resources if you want to kind of start working in this area. Very simple. You have to understand the classical machine learning. There is no easy shortcut. Like there's this book by Francois Chole. It's like a bedtime book. You can kind of read it through very fast. It's on coding and all. The second one is this Ian Goodfellow, Yoshua Bengio, and Arun Kurbila. Two of the people, they are like Turing awardee. They came up with this book, and you can basically go through it like at least first 5-6 chapters and understand what does deep learning really mean. Then there is a book by Bartow and Sutton on reinforcement learning. And the last one, my favorite, this book by Shive and David, where he talks about learning theory from a statistical machine learning perspective. Like, what does learning mean? I mean, when do you see that the learning has happened? I mean, when can you give guarantees? Like, I mean, or like proving this kind of guarantees that this learning model is better than that learning model. For that, you have to be very mathematically rigorous and also. So for that, the last book is very much important. Then there is this like EDX course by Peter Vitek, who is sadly no more with us. Like, yeah, so he came up with this. He was an expert in quantum machine learning, and he gave this course online on EDX. You can go there and learn about quantum machine learning. Probably, I think it's archived at the moment, but somehow I think it will be announced again in future, and they will show the archived video. But you can find, I think, the videos on YouTube also. Then there are some review papers, and then there are book by Maria Schuld and Peter Vitek, and yeah, you can kind of go through that. Now, if you are a physicist and want to go through that, there are some review papers. I have shamelessly put my review paper also there. So that's it. I mean, these are the key things you can go through and kind of learn about it. So I would say the field is in a very early stage, and there are so many mathematical, conceptual, physics-based challenges there that some like a newcomer can contribute. And it's going to be very exciting. Like every day we see new results, new ideas coming, and a vibrant community of researchers all over the globe are working on it. Many startups are working, many companies, like established companies, are working in this area. And in long term, we expect quantum machine learning, when done properly, like like not in a very haphazard manner, but done properly, like using mathematical properly, like with argument and all. I believe it can change the fate of humanity also. So with that, I will conclude. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kishore, for sharing all the resources and your insightful presentation. Now we will just have a short time for Q&A now. Yeah. Yes, Akarna, would you like to come on as well?
Sorry. Yeah, so sorry. I was just answering a couple of the questions that people had. So just like going through that. Yeah, I think I answered like most of them. But one of them had a really huge question. So this is Greg. If you would like to sort of mail me this like question, then I can sort of answer it all together at a go. And I guess someone else had a question on whether or not we can actually represent digits like in classical paradigm, like basically 10 bits as 2, and what is the equivalent in quantum paradigm. So I think like that's like I don't know, like my knowledge here might be a little incompetent. Maybe Kishore can help me out a bit. But in my opinion, I don't think you can represent it, because at any point a qubit is, it holds a lot of states together, unlike a classical bit, which only holds either 0 or 1. So I don't think there's a equivalent in quantum paradigm for that. So I don't know, Kishore, do you have any thoughts here on that?
Which question is this? Like sorry, like, I mean, I kind of missed it. Like,
Yeah. I think you can check it out in the Q&A.
Yeah, so this question by Lee Hay, or
Yeah.
Okay. So are you able to provide a specific data representation of an integer? So I mean, there are like many ways to like kind of encode the data. Like, I mean, how should I say? Like, you can encode in the amplitude, you can encode in the bits, like qubits, or you can, I mean, so for example, so a very simple, basis encoding, where like you can have many like qubits which you can initialize at 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, like, I mean, the way you kind of represent your integers as in a binary way. So similarly, you can simply initialize your qubits in the standard basis and then represent any integer possible, because I mean, binary encoding can encode any integer. But you can also encode that in the amplitudes also. And then, I mean, there are many different ways to encode. So if you're really interested, then there is a book called Supervised Learning with Quantum Computers by Maria Schuld. In chapter 3, she talks about it. So there is a question by Greg. Yeah, are there reinforcement learning algorithm based on QML better than? Yeah, so I mean, one of the pioneers of the field, quantum machine learning, Vedran Dunjko, he has some reinforcement learning algorithms on QML. I am also kind of working in this area, like a few things. And you have some advantage, but I mean, still I want to say that, like the way they kind of show advantage is that, yeah, I mean, they are prone to, like this kind of dequantization and all often. So you have to, I mean, any reinforcement learning at the end of the day is a Markov decision process, right? And you have to think about when you go from a classical Markov decision process to quantum Markov decision process, what happens? Like, can you show some advantage there? And then try to build on a step by step. And the point is that, many of the algorithms in the reinforcement learning that we have at particular moment, like those PPO and all, often they are very heuristic. So there, if you want to prove some kind of theoretical guarantee, that will be difficult. So maybe some empirical guarantee one can show that, but we do not have, like the large scale quantum computers. So we cannot give empirical guarantee at the moment, but still some proof of concept with 5 qubit, 10 qubits, maybe one can give at the moment. If you are really interested about this, try to check out the papers by Vedran Dunjko. He has written something. Then the second question is, can QQ take in classical data and convert it to qubits? Yeah, sure. Can you give example of QQ application? Yeah, I mean, this quantum linear system problem. I mean, you can use it to solve, or you can check out, a recent paper by me and my collaborators on near-term quantum algorithms for linear system of equations, and there we kind of tackle this QQ part. Now, what is your take on big data QC on quantum computing on distributed systems? I mean, on distributed system, I would say I'm not an expert in this area. Like, I mean, because I haven't worked personally there, so I would like to refrain from commenting. But I believe anywhere if you use quantum computer, I mean, like I can comment, but I would like you to, consult some people like maybe Joe Fitzsimmons and others. They're expert in these areas. But I would say still, like, because we see that the quantum computer is a superset of the classical computer. So there will be an advantage, if you can somehow chunk your data in a way that it can be efficiently represented. Then probably, this big data problem. So, like, think about it like this. Like, sometimes you are not really interested in big data. You are interested in the summary of statistics, like, what is the mean, what is the, like this kind of summary things. And it could be interesting that it could be sometimes solved on a quantum computer efficiently than being done on a classical computer. Now, the next question is, are you aware of NISQ quantum computers using practical application currently? there is no practical application of quantum computer at the moment. We have proof of concept, and we are still waiting for the tipping point when we will get the practical application of quantum computer, maybe in 5 years. And the day we will see the practical application of quantum computer, the field will get revolutionized. So we are there. We believe it can happen any moment. Is there something as revolutionary as Resonate NLP transformer in the QML space? Very nice question. I mean, we believe maybe QAOA is something very powerful, but let's see. Then what is your recommendation? Nielsen and Chuang or something? Yeah, Nielsen and Chuang is very good book. I mean, try to go through that. And then if you want to go a bit mathematical, then there are lecture notes by John Waters. And then you can read some blogs by Scott Aronson and others. And yeah, I mean, like a lot of, try to check out archive, like on archive every day, many nice papers come, and sometimes put their lecture notes also. So you can go through there. Yeah. Then Madhav asked something. Yeah. He said, is the field of quantum machine learning only restricted to academic research groups currently, or their industrial job opportunity in a company there? Madhav, it's like, how should I say? This quantum machine learning is something which is for, I mean, both the academicians and as well as industrial people, they are interested in it. And there are big groups in Google, Microsoft, IBM, they are currently working actively. And like in Singapore also, we have Entropica Labs, we have Horizon Quantum Computing, then Xanadu in Toronto. I mean, there are a lot of people around, and who are working in this area, and both academicians as well as how should I say, industry people, they are working actively. So it's quite active.
So I would also like to take a stab at Madhav's question. So that's a really nice question. So I do think that you do not need you do not need to be in the academia for sure to do this, because I don't come from a I don't have a physics background. I do have a machine learning background, but I do not have a physics background, and I come from the field of electrical and computer engineering, and I have taken this out purely out of interest. So you could do the same thing. Another place that you could check out to actually use quantum computers, just in case you're sort of scared that you cannot have the access to it, or maybe academia or only big industries have the access to it currently, you can check out D-Wave. So last I checked, they give you 1 minute free access of the quantum computer per month, which is a lot, because even if you try and use their quantum computers, you won't be able to finish up that 1 minute. So do check it out. I do believe they have actual quantum computers. They are not simulators in their sense, but the only thing is they are quantum annealers, and they are adiabatic in that sense. But apart from that, if you want to try your hands on that, you can definitely do that. I'll go ahead and post the link just in case you want to check it out.
Yeah, and then I think there is question why break. I think maybe SG Innovate can answer this.
Yep. So yes, I think we end off the Q&A at a good point. Yeah. So there will be we'll be having the event recording up on our YouTube page, and you'll receive the link through a post-event email. So yeah, thank you so much, Kishore and Akarna, for sharing your insightful presentation and answering all the questions about how beginners start and all the beginner resources that's available out there for anyone who are keen on learning more about quantum computing and machine learning. And also thank you for attendees for giving such hard-hitting questions to our presenters, as well as staying all the way through to today's event. Yeah, so yeah, we'll check in with our speakers if they'll be keen to share the slides with you, because I know a lot of you will be interested to read through all the resources at your own time as well. So yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, SG Innovate and CQT and Archana and others for this opportunity. And
yeah, thank you, Kishore, too, and Akarna as well. So have a great day ahead, and
thank you so much.
Hope to see you again.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.